Hello, my name is Jay Thakkar and today I'll be talking about the game design aspect of Cultist Simulator. So, Cultist Simulator was released on 31st May 2018 and it was developed by Weather Factory and PlayDigious. So, Cultist Simulator is a proper card-based strategy game. The genres are very overlapping in the sense that it is also mystery strategy, um, RPG elements combined. So it is a quite a mixture of all of these genres in our work. So the basic mechanics of the game revolve around two types of cards that you can play with. One are the action cards, or you can say the verb cards, and the other are the normal cards or the noun cards, which you interact the verb cards using it. So the action cards are of two types, permanent and temporary. So the permanent action cards are the cards which you have available since from roughly the 2 minutes of the game, since the starting of the game. You have access to all of them by roughly 2 minutes, and those are basically work, time passes, study, dream, explore, and talk. So there are six permanent action cards, and there are many more temporary action cards which keep popping in and out throughout the game. Um, some of the examples are no health is left or starvation, which depends upon the factors of your permanent action cards not receiving their input cards, which is the normal cards. Um, so the game loop is basically consisted of interactions between the normal card and the action cards. So you give one normal card, you give another normal card, and action card, and you get new normal cards as a result. So in that sense, your um, library or your inventory of cards keep rising up and up as you play through the game. But on the other hand, uh, the another mechanic of the game is around these cards. It is based around these cards, which is the time element of the game, which is where each card, most of them, have a timer in them, which shows that how long the card has a life left. So you have to uh, think about it, strategize, and then use the cards accordingly in the limited time left. All the action cards, when you use them, has a particular time that it needs to process the cards to give you new cards. So it's a process of taking cards in, giving cards out, using cards before they expire, just fulfilling. So sometimes a temporary action might pop out and it is time limited, and if you don't complete it in the necessary amount of time, it may lead to some consequences. For example, uh, the permanent action card, which is expensive if time passes. uh, so time passes basically takes away your coin or your expenses, and if you don't have any expense or money left in the game, a starvation temporary action card might pop up, which basically says that you have to eat, otherwise you will die. So there are consequences to not fulfilling certain action cards, which are time based. So for example, the card that I just mentioned, time passes, is a forever running ticking timing bomb, you can say, that will suck up your funds card. So before going any more forward, I would like to tell you that there are four basic resources in the game, which is health, funds, which is the money, and passion and reason. So coming back, so time passes is a ticking time bomb where every 60 seconds you need to keep feeding it one funds card, which basically lets you keep living, eat, and survive. If you miss it, you will end up starving, and then you'll have to use the resource funds card again, uh, along with a health card to regain your hunger. So it's a process. It's a loop that keeps ticking. So, uh, in the sense that mechanically, the game is technically very simple, but when you add it up with the narrative, it kind of becomes a very intense game. So, in the sense that the narrative is basically you can start off with four different starts in the base game, which are called as legacies. You have the aspirant, you have the bright young thing, you have the detective, and you have the physician. So all four of them have some ups and downs. The aspirant is the most basic one, where you are kind of like a balanced person. Bright young thing is someone who has a lot of money, but not as much educational exposure regarding that. Detective is someone whose job is very demanding, in the sense that you cannot abandon your job to do any other thing. And a physician is a much more um, educated person, which has much more reasoning, but in other sense it is much more average. So all four of them give you a different kind of approach towards starting the game, but after a certain point of time it just becomes the same thing. So along with the narrative, I will start by um, pushing some points what the designers talked about while they were making the game. I have gone through an interview. I'll be telling some points which the designers had made, and then I'll connect that with the mechanics, narratives, and what I felt about that. So so the first thing that the designer did mention was he wanted to make a game which made the player be the antagonist in the game, and not a protagonist, which most of the other games, or many of the games, want you to be. Majority, I would say, where they would want you to be the where they would want you to be a protagonist and do things and be good at it, blah 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 blah. The developers of Cultist Simulator were like, no, we will not do that. We want the player to experience the more antagonist side. They want the player to be a bad person in that sense. And Cultist Simulator does that pretty well, in the sense of mechanical wise. You are discovering the occult side or the cultist side, where there is things like which you would not want to believe, but you are digging in. You have followers following you. Um, you have options to kill them, which do have obviously consequences, but it is also rewarding in the sense of you making your own cult. And along with that narrative sense, obviously, if you are playing a cultist simulator, doing things that would lead you to become a cultist, it obviously be rewarding in the sense of narrative. So one thing that the game pushes you very well is uh, to feel that you are the person. The game wants you to have more, you can say, meaning towards everything in the game, uh, in the sense that each card has something written on it, each card has some kind of meaning behind it, which makes the player believe, which makes the player care more towards the game, more towards the cards, and kind of kind of pushes them to make decisions more personally, rather than um, in the perspective of game sense, or like uh, um, something that would make them more benefited in the sense of gameplay. So which is where I would want to introduce about the topic, which is the intrinsic and the extrinsic aspect of the player, which is where the game basically pushes the player to take intrinsic choices, which is basically the player taking the control in their hand and taking decisions that would just benefit them and them only, not of the game, or basically defying what the designer would want them to do. Which, for example, a basic example would be in the action card book, I need money, the game wants me to have money, and for that I might have to work on my job, something like that. And me choosing not to work on that job and to do some kind of occult activity as my work uh, rewards me as a player. Nothing in game sense, but it does reward me as a player in my own personal mind space sense. For example, I'd be much happy if I would have if I would have done some cultist activity as my work, and I would have received some kind of cultist reward. That reward might not have been as good as me working my normal job and getting my funds, but it did reward me in the sense that I am happy I took a choice which made me happy, in the sense that basically the player uh, would take choices that would benefit their thesis of how the game is going, which is what the developers want the player to do, is to take their own choices and be proud of them, be um, happy with them. It involves the player much more deeply in the game. It makes the player think much more uh, personally towards the game. The choices become personal, the intensity becomes much more higher, and the whole experience enhances, I would say, 5 times or 10 times or whatever. Then uh, the designer also said that they wanted to focus on the narrative, but they also wanted to focus on the aspect of managing resources, uh, which in this game means literally and fundamentally in the game. Fundamentally in the game, in the sense that what they actually mean, which is basically you managing your health, funds, passion, and reason, which are the four basic resources that you need throughout the game every time, all the time. And literally in the sense that you at after some point, like I would say 15-20 minutes into the game, you have so many cards on your board that you have to manage them so well. You have to keep everything at place so that you don't miss any of the cards. You have to keep a track on their countdowns going down. Everything, it gets super messy if you're not organized in that sense too. So in that sense, the designer pushes the player to manage things, which again, moving things onto a certain part of the board kind of adds like a personal element to it. If I move a card from one place to another and I'm stacking those kind of cards on that certain place, uh, first thing that is benefiting the player is they know where the card is, and the second thing is you're interacting with the card, so that kind of gives you another glimpse of the card, of what it does or what it has. And the third thing is they wanted to give the player the freedom of choice, which again, past a couple of minutes, you unlock all the action cards, the permanent action cards, and that is where you are basically free to do whatever you want. You can, in a cultist simulator, you can just keep on working, and become this brilliant office boy clerk, and the game has a reward for it, game has an achievement for it, but obviously that is not what the game was intended for. So the game kind of lets you free throughout the game, and the game wants you to fail, the game wants you to die over and over again to get a mechanical feel of the game, which again, they do not give any tutorial in the game, and they just want you to keep exploring the game and get accustomed to the mechanics of the game while you keep dying. So their thought process behind that was basically, if the player gets too attached to the world and they die, they will be very hesitant to start a new world. But if the player is given no sense of tutorial and they are just put into the world and they keep dying over and over again, they will get accustomed to the death while not being so much more connected to the world, because they will be much more focused into um, thinking about the mechanics, how the mechanics function in the game. So that is a thing which goes into the game's favor, which goes into the designer's favor. And me personally, I also think that worked for me, because even though I had put like 1.5 hour into one of my runs, I think so I have played 7 runs, and I think so the longest one was 1.5 hours ish, but it did not uh, like put it did not turn me off. I was really looking forward to play more and find out. Each death is kind of a learning that you know that the next time you don't have to die for. Um, for me personally, I died like thrice due to despair, actually 4 times due to despair. And it is again something that I keep in mind next time, that I do not let my despair catch up to me, and I would always have my containment ready to whenever I had to counter despair. Um, so the thing that the designers wanted the player to feel was them to feel lonely and anxious, which they have orchestrated beautifully because of the game. Starting out with you, they just put you on a board. You are this lonely person. However you start the game, you don't have any companion by your side, which most of the games do have to have some kind of reliability aspect in the game. Um, you have no one, you start off alone, and it kind of establishes you as a lonely person. It rewards you for being lonely, and anxiety or anxious part comes with the gameplay, in the sense that you have to manage so many resources, you have to manage so many tiles, you have to manage so many cards. All the tiles, all the cards, they all have a countdown going on continuously, taking down, um, causing a visual overload, causing a mental overload. You have the option to pause the game, you have the option to play the game at normal speed, and you have the option to play it at a fast forward speed. But even with the ability to pause the game, it does get very overwhelming, because um, there are six different processes going on at the same time, and those six processes will have six different outcomes, and those outcomes may or may not lead to something you would want to have them led to. In the sense that sometimes things may go the wrong side, and you would have used the wrong resources over there which you needed over here, and that would cause a lot of um, tension to arise, which would cause a lot of anxiety to arise. So you have to plan out all of your moves before playing the next turn. Sometimes it is good to just not play into something, play into the permanent action cards, in the sense that sometimes it's just fine to not dream, explore, um, or talk to someone or study anything, because you might want to wait for the next resources you might be getting and using them over there. But the the feeling that the designers had to portray, they had portrayed it very beautifully. um, the sound design plays a major aspect in the game, as there's these cogs clunking sounds, there's this clock ticking sounds. The sound design, depending upon what you're doing, changes. The intensity rises with the sound, the intensity goes down with the sound. The sound plays an incredible. The sound is a very good factor that lets you immerse in the game very well, compared to if you're not using your headphones or not listening to the sound. The next part is the so the developers, they mentioned their game as a Marmite game. So a Marmite game basically is a game that people will either love, like they will become cults for the Cultist simulator, or they will hate it, in the sense that they would touch it, play it for a few minutes, and then just refund it. So the reason behind that was because mostly the AAA studios, they have this huge budget that they can play around with, and since they have to recover this huge budget, they have to go across and sell it to like large target audience. Which if they don't, they will lose their money. So they kind of make their game relatively easy, accessible to all of them. But since it's an indie studio, it can take the gamble of just targeting a certain group of people who will love it to the hell of it, rather than targeting to everyone who would love it but not like adore it, or maybe be cults behind it. Which the personally, I would say the game is not really for me, but I see where the target is. I see how it engages people, because um, I will not lie, but the I have played through 7 games, and the first couple of them I felt pretty dry. But from third game onwards, it became way more personal to me, as I was taking decisions way more personally. I was very much involved in the game loop, and I see why people like would like this game so much because it kind of becomes a cultist simulator, but in the sense that the first part of the game is much more of a life simulator, and then the majority of the part is the cultist simulator part. So the starting part lets the player get involved with the game, let the player reverberate at the same frequency as the game, and after that is when the game uh, the game designer and everything, they tie up and make the player lead the path that they want the player to lead to become the cultist of the world. And I feel after the fourth or fifth playthrough, I did feel pretty well, um, like pretty involved with the game, and I would want to get to the end, but I don't think so. Personally, I have enough patience and enough uh, sanity to go through the whole management of resources and everything. But I do get where the target audience is. The next thing is, um, there are different victories. There are occult victories. There are non-occult victories, which again, the game kind of rewards you in all the sense, in the sense that if you would die in the very early stages, that still is kind of an ending, and even if you die in later stages, every kind of end is some kind of progress that you have made. All of the endings are kind of tied up together in the sense that you are playing a playthrough as an aspirant, or maybe as a bright young thing. The next playthrough, you see that uh, the bright young thing's father has died, and that is in the newspaper. If you're playing as an aspirant, you might see it pop up in your world. Or maybe you're an aspirant, you have this follower. And in the next playthrough, you're playing as a detective, you might be catching that follower of your in the last world. So, in the sense that the game, the more you play it, the more you are in the frequency or in the vibe of it. Mm, it starts getting more and more familiar to you the more you play it, um, and involving or like getting immersed in the game becomes way more easier. The next thing is, um, they wanted to have a detail. They wanted to portray a detailed game mechanic. They wanted to portray the game in a very detailed mechanical sense, which they achieved through the narratives. And in the sense of narrative, they went with a very so it might sound very opposing, but they wanted to have a very complicated mechanical system in the game, but they wanted to keep the game mechanically simple. And how they achieved it was in the sense that you only have you only have cards to play around with, and you have action tiles in which you put the cards in. So, in a very large overview sense, it is a very simple game. But once you dive in the narrative part of the game, which is that each card has a story behind it, each tile, every time it refreshes, has a story behind it. Each of the tile, each of the card have a countdown going behind them, and each decision will lead to a different path. Each decision may or may be the uh, deciding factor. You may not even know that putting using your last fund or saving it would be this kind of a mm, decision that would either end your game or not. Uh, so in that sense, the I think so, me personally, that the designers have succeeded by keeping the game pretty simple on the top, but pretty complicated once you get into it, once you get into the vibe of it. So, me personally, I never thought I would have played a game like this, and after playing it, I do realize what the hell I was missing. And the major thing for me was that the game being so simple, that just being cards with very basic art, which is very beautifully executed, um, being shown to the player using those cards to do things. On surface, it looks like that. But me, I was imagining things in my head, like even if it was a simple thing as maybe I would say study this book about this murder, and the clock was ticking around that, and I would get something like a page which describes the murder, and that would, in the sense of a game, like if you look at it from a third perspective, it is just you receiving another asset to play around with. But me as the player, I felt like, oh my god, damn, I did study a murder and I did crack the case or something like that. I was so much involved in the game, which did make me realize that what I was missing on. And um, I just feel it's a very amazing game. It is very amazingly executed, and yeah, I just like it. And I would like to end this topic, end this discussion with just one thing that uh, Cultist Simulator may have its flaws, may have its pros and cons, but in a game design perspective, it is a brilliant game, and it has done what it went out to do, in the sense that it did give players a very large narrative experience with a very minimal mechanical overhaul, I would say, and they did get the vibe bang on, they did get the sound design bang on, and they did get the lore bang on. Even though I have not completed the game fully, I might have just completed 20% of it, but I still got so much involved in the game, which is thanks to the narrative, mechanical, and uh, sound design, especially, like these three things coming together, and it is just a very well made cohesive experience. So that is all for me. Thank you so much.